The court gathered to watch the wolfless widow be rejected again. Instead, the Alpha King's dying wolf crawled to her feet. Selene stood at the edge of the grand mating circle in the moonlit hall, the black mourning veil still draped over her shoulders, even though 2 years had passed since her husband's death. The pack whispered behind jeweled hands. The wolfless widow, they called her, too broken to be chosen again. Her late mate had died defending her during a border raid, and with him had gone her wolf, or so the court believed. Grief had taught her loyalty, but it had never explained why her soul still felt unfinished. Tonight, the Alpha King was to choose a new Luna from the noble houses. Selene had been summoned only as a living reminder of what happened to those who were not strong enough. King Lucian Blackthorn entered the hall like a storm wrapped in human skin. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes the color of winter thunder, he carried the weight of a dying wolf inside his chest. When he passed Selene, his jaw tightened as if his wolf had reacted before he could stop it. Then his expression hardened into deliberate dismissal. The court's laughter was soft but sharp. Beneath the mourning veil, the pale moon mark on her wrist throbbed with a pain she had spent 2 years hiding. The ceremony began. Lucian walked slowly along the line of noblewomen, his presence forcing every wolf in the hall to lower its head. When he reached the end of the line and turned back toward the altar, the air in the chamber suddenly thickened. A low, broken growl tore from Lucian's throat. He staggered forward, one hand clutching his chest as his inner wolf forced its way out of his body. This had never happened in public before. The massive black wolf materialized on the marble floor, dark and trembling, its golden eyes clouded with pain. Healers rushed forward, but the beast snarled at them, refusing their touch. If Lucian's wolf died before the mating rite ended, every noble house in the hall would have the right to challenge his throne. Then the dying wolf began to crawl. It dragged itself across the cold stone, past the shocked noblewomen, past the royal guards, leaving a dark trail behind it. The entire court watched in stunned silence as the Alpha King's wolf, once the most feared beast in the kingdom, crawled like a wounded animal straight toward the woman they had all come to mock. It collapsed at Selene's feet with a broken whine, pressing its dark, trembling head against her black skirts as if begging for mercy. Selene stared down at the dying beast. Her hands trembled, but she did not step back. Instead, she slowly knelt and placed her palm on its fur. A soft silver light bloomed beneath her fingers, the first visible sign of the widow moon gift she had carried in secret since the night her husband died. The light did not only enter the wolf, it pulled something from her too, a sharp, tearing sensation deep in her chest, as if part of her own life force was being offered in exchange. The massive wolf let out a single, shuddering breath. Its eyes cleared for a moment, and it looked up at her with something close to recognition. Lucian flinched as if the recognition had struck through his own ribs. A collective gasp swept through the hall. The dying wolf breathed again, shallow but steady, and for the first time in 2 years, something inside Selene answered back. The court remained frozen in silence. Then the whispers began. The wolfless widow. She touched the king's wolf. She carries something. Lucian rose slowly to his feet. His golden eyes never left Selene as the massive black wolf faded back into his body, leaving him pale and shaken. For a long moment he simply stared at her, as though seeing her for the first time. "Take her to the eastern tower," he commanded, his voice rough. "No one is to approach her without my order." 2 guards stepped forward. Selene rose without protest, though her legs felt unsteady. As she was led away, she kept her eyes forward, refusing to let the court see the tears that threatened to fall. Behind her, Lucian stood alone on the platform, one hand pressed to his chest where his wolf had nearly left him forever. The court watched him in stunned silence. The mating ceremony had ended without a Luna being chosen, and the Alpha King's dying wolf had chosen the one woman the entire kingdom had already discarded. Beneath her mourning veil, the bleeding moonmark formed the shape of a crown. The old moon tower was quieter than Selene remembered. 2 years ago, she had been brought here after her husband's death to receive the blood oath. The same cold stone walls, the same narrow windows overlooking the cliffs. Only this time, she was not merely a grieving widow being punished. She was something far more dangerous in the eyes of the court, an unknown. The guards left her alone after locking the heavy door. Selene stood in the center of the chamber for a long moment, then slowly walked to the window. Her fingers brushed the stone ledge as she looked out at the dark forest stretching beyond the kingdom. The moon mark on her wrist still throbbed faintly. She did not understand what had happened in the hall. She had only wanted to ease the wolf's suffering. She had never intended to reveal the gift she had hidden since the night her husband died. A soft knock sounded at the door. Before she could answer, the door opened. King Lucian stepped inside. He was no longer wearing the ceremonial robes. Instead, he had changed into a simple black tunic, though the weight of authority still clung to him. His golden eyes immediately found her standing by the window. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Lucian closed the door behind him and remained near it, as though unsure whether to approach. His wolf, though no longer visible, still lingered in the air between them, restless, watchful, and strangely calm in her presence. "You should not have come here alone," Selene said quietly. "The court will talk." "They are already talking," Lucian replied. His voice was low and rougher than it had been in the hall. By dawn, 3 noble houses had already demanded the right to challenge me if my wolf weakens again. Selene turned to face him fully. "And what do you believe?" Lucian studied her for a long moment. The cold dismissal he had shown earlier was gone, replaced by something far more complicated. "I believe," he said slowly, "that my wolf has not responded to anyone like that in 7 years. Not since my first mate died." The words hung in the air between them. Selene's chest tightened. She had heard the stories that the Alpha King's first Luna had died in childbirth, taking their unborn child with her. But she had never imagined the effect it had left on him. "Your wolf is dying," she said. It was not a question. Lucian's jaw tightened. He walked slowly toward the center of the room, stopping a few feet away from her. "After my Luna's death, my wolf began to fade. At first it was slow, then the fire inside me started turning inward, consuming instead of strengthening. The healers said only a true mate could stabilize it. I stopped believing in such things long ago." He looked at her then, and for the first time, Selene saw the exhaustion behind his power. "Tonight, when my wolf crawled to you, it felt something it has not felt in years. Recognition. Peace." Selene lowered her gaze to her hands. "I did not mean to call it. I only wanted to ease its pain." "You did more than that," Lucian said. "You gave it breath when it was already leaving my body, and in doing so, you may have saved my throne." He took one step closer. The air between them felt heavier. "The court will demand answers. They will want to know why a wolfless widow could do what no healer could. And they will not like the truth." Selene lifted her chin. "What is the truth, Your Majesty?" Lucian's golden eyes darkened. "That my wolf recognized you as something more than a stranger. That the woman they called broken may be the only one who can keep me from losing everything." Selene could feel the widow moon gift stirring beneath her skin, quiet and watchful, as though listening to the king's words. Lucian's voice dropped lower. "I do not expect you to trust me, not after the way I looked at you tonight. But I need you to understand something." He met her eyes directly. "I will not let them harm you for what happened in that hall. Not while I still draw breath." Selene searched his face. She saw the weight he carried. The throne, the dying wolf, the political storm already gathering outside these walls. And beneath it all, she saw something else. A man who had spent years convincing himself he could rule alone. "You cannot protect me from the entire court," she said quietly. "I can try," Lucien answered. "And I will." He took another step forward until there were only a few inches between them. His hand lifted slightly, as though he wanted to touch the moon mark on her wrist. But he stopped himself. Beneath her sleeve, the crown-shaped mark warmed. Lucien's breath caught as his wolf answered with a low, broken rumble inside his chest. "Rest tonight," he said, voice slightly rough. "Tomorrow the Blood Council will question you. I will be there." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Selene." She looked at him. "Your husband, the man who died defending you. Did he know about the mark on your wrist?" Selene was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally. "He never saw it glow." Lucien nodded slowly, as if the answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "Then perhaps," he said, "the moon has always had other plans for you." He left, without another word. Selene stood alone in the chamber long after the door closed. She walked back to the window and looked out at the dark forest. The moon was high and silver, casting pale light across the cliffs. She touched the mark on her wrist. It no longer bled, but it felt warm beneath her fingers. For the first time since her husband's death, Selene allowed herself to wonder if the pain she had carried for 2 years had been preparing her for something greater than survival. Something that involved the Alpha King, whose dying wolf had chosen her when no one else would. Far below, in the ancient moon temple buried beneath the palace, High Priestess Lirael stood before a weathered stone altar. The chamber was lit only by a single silver flame. On the altar before her, the faded carving of a crowned widow began to bleed silver light. Lirael went still, her fingers hovering above the glowing lines. "The widow moon has chosen again," she whispered. "Then the old queen's mistake must be buried before it wakes." She turned toward the shadows, where several robed figures waited in silence. "Prepare the old rites. If the gift has returned to her blood, we cannot allow history to repeat itself." The Blood Council convened at noon the following day. Selene was escorted from the old moon tower under heavy guard. She wore a simple dark gown, her wrists free of chains, though the pale moon mark on her right wrist remained hidden beneath the long sleeve. She walked with her head high, refusing to lower her eyes even as the entire court watched her pass. The great hall was packed. Nobles filled every tier, their expressions ranging from open hostility to fearful curiosity. At the center, the Blood Council sat in a semicircle. High Priestess Lirael stood slightly behind them, silver robes pristine, her face cold and unreadable. King Lucien sat upon the throne, his golden eyes fixed on Selene the moment she entered. He did not smile, but something in his posture eased at the sight of her unharmed. Lord Carath rose to his feet. "Selene of the fallen bloodline," he intoned. "You stand before this council accused of using forbidden magic upon the Alpha King's wolf. What say you?" Selene stopped in the center of the hall. She did not kneel. "I used no spell," she answered clearly. "I only placed my hand upon a dying beast. If that is forbidden, then the moon itself is guilty." A ripple of whispers spread through the court. Lirael stepped forward, her voice smooth as ice. "The widow moon gift has been forbidden for generations. It is a power born only from great loss, and it has always brought ruin. If your presence here is truly innocent, then prove it." She lifted a thin silver blade from the altar beside the council. The metal was old and etched with faded widow symbols. "Touch the widow knife," Lirael said. "If the moon did not choose you, it will burn the lie from your blood." The entire hall fell silent. Selene looked at the blade, then at Lirael. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and reached out. The moment her fingers touched the silver edge, something strange happened. Instead of burning her, the blade bent toward her wrist like a needle drawn to a star. The metal curved, almost alive, until the tip hovered directly above the hidden moon mark beneath her sleeve. A collective gasp rose from the court. Before anyone could react, the mark on Selene's wrist flared beneath the fabric. A faint silver light bled through the dark sleeve, glowing brightly enough for everyone to see. On the stone floor in front of her, the same crown-shaped mark appeared once more, larger this time, before slowly fading away. Lucian's wolf growled inside his chest, not in pain this time, but in recognition. The Alpha King rose from his throne, his expression dark. "Enough," he said, voice cutting through the hall. "The blade has answered. She carries the Widow Moon gift. Any further test is an insult to the moon itself." Lirael did not back down. Her eyes gleamed with cold certainty. "If the gift has truly returned," she said, "then we must act before it takes root. Bring me the death oath of her first mate." The robed figures standing behind the council went still. On the ancient altar, the faded carving of a crowned widow suddenly split open with a soft cracking sound, revealing a thin strip of blackened silver bound tightly with faded wedding thread, the very thread that had once sealed Selene's marriage vows. Lirael's voice dropped to a whisper that still carried across the hall. "If the moon has chosen her again," she said, "then we will remind it who she already belongs to." A heavy silence fell over the court. Selene felt the blood drain from her face. That thread. She had burned it herself after her husband's funeral. How could it still exist? Lucian stepped down from the throne and moved to stand beside her. He did not touch her, but his presence alone was a clear statement. "This session is over," he declared. "Selene will return to the old moon tower. Anyone who attempts to use old rites against her without my permission will answer directly to me." He turned to Selene and offered his arm. She hesitated for only a second before placing her hand on it. Together, they walked out of the great hall, while the entire court watched in stunned silence. They did not speak until they reached the quiet corridor leading back to the old moon tower. "You did not have to defend me so openly," Selene said quietly. "I did," Lucian replied. His voice was low but firm. "If I had remained silent any longer, they would have used that blade on you before the sun set." He stopped walking and turned to face her. His golden eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "My wolf recognized you the moment it saw you," he said. "Not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as something it has been waiting for. I will not ignore that again." Selene looked down at her sleeve, where the moon mark still faintly glowed beneath the fabric. "I do not know what this gift truly is," she admitted. "I only know that it woke when your wolf was dying, and it has not stopped since." Lucian was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "Whatever it is," he said, "we will face it together. I will not let them turn you into another sacrifice for old fears." He reached out and gently touched her sleeve, right above the mark. The moment his fingers made contact, the crown-shaped symbol pulsed once beneath the fabric, and Lucian's wolf answered with a low, steady rumble inside his chest, not in warning, but in recognition. Selene looked up at him. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly see the man behind the title, a king carrying a dying wolf, a throne under threat, and a growing pull toward the woman he was never supposed to want. Lucian met her gaze without looking away. "Rest," he said. "I will return tonight. There are things we must speak of, away from the court." He turned and walked away, his broad back disappearing down the stone corridor. Selene remained standing there for a long moment, her hand unconsciously resting over her wrist where the mark still pulsed warmly. She had spent 2 years believing she would never feel anything again. Yet, standing in that corridor, after facing the entire Blood Council and walking out under the protection of the Alpha King, she felt something dangerous begin to stir inside her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Far below in the Moon Temple, High Priestess Lirael stood before the ancient altar. The crowned widow carving had stopped bleeding, but the strip of blackened silver bound with Selene's old wedding thread now lay in her palm. She closed her fingers around it slowly. "Prepare the Widow-Severing Rite," she said to the robed figures waiting in the shadows. "If the gift has awakened in her blood, then we will bind her back to the dead man she once swore herself to." On the altar, the cracked carving of the crowned widow pulsed once more with faint silver light. "The moon may have chosen her again," Lirael whispered, "but we will remind it who she already belongs to." The days that followed the council hearing were heavy with silence. Selene remained in the old moon tower under the king's protection, but the walls no longer felt like a prison. They felt like a temporary pause before the next storm. Every morning, the healers came to check the moon mark on her wrist. Every evening, the court whispered louder about the wolfless widow who had somehow captured the Alpha King's dying wolf. Selene spent most of her time by the window, watching the sky change colors. She had grown used to solitude over the past 2 years. After her husband's death, the pack had slowly turned their backs on her. Friends stopped visiting. Even those who once smiled at her now looked away when she passed. Grief had taught her how to exist in silence, but this silence was different. It was filled with questions she did not have answers for. Why had her husband died protecting her if he was never meant to be her true mate? Why had her wolf disappeared the night he took his last breath? And why did the widow moon gift a power she had spent years suppressing suddenly awaken the moment Lucian's wolf was dying? She touched the mark on her wrist. It no longer bled, but it felt warmer than before, as though it was slowly waking from a long sleep. A soft knock broke her thoughts. Lucian entered without waiting for permission. He had been doing that more often lately, coming to see her without the weight of the entire court watching. Tonight he looked more tired than usual. The faint scales along his jaw were more visible, a sign that his wolf was still struggling. He closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, simply watching her. "You should be resting," he said. "I have rested enough," Selene replied. She turned from the window to face him. "The court is growing restless. I can feel it even from here." Lucian nodded slowly. He walked toward her and stopped a few steps away. "3 more houses have joined the demand for a blood challenge," he said. "They believe my wolf is too weak to lead. They think if they force a challenge now, they can take the throne before I recover." Selene's chest tightened. "Because of me. Because of what happened in the hall," Lucian corrected. "Because my wolf chose you when it should have chosen death." He looked at her then, and the exhaustion in his golden eyes was mixed with something else. Something raw and honest. "I have spent years ruling with an iron hand because I believed that was the only way to keep the kingdom from falling apart. But every time I look at you, I wonder if I have been wrong all along." Selene searched his face. "What do you mean?" Lucian took one more step closer. The space between them felt smaller than before. "My first mate died trying to give me an heir. After she was gone, I convinced myself that love was a weakness I could not afford. I chose duty. I chose alliances. I chose Vespera because she was safe." His voice grew quieter. "But none of them made my wolf feel alive the way you did that night in the hall." Selene looked down at her hands. The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. "I was married once," she said softly. "He was a good man. He died protecting me. For a long time, I believed that was love. But lately, I have been wondering if what we had was real, or if it was only what we both needed at the time." She looked up at him. "Grief taught me how to survive, but it never taught me how to want something again." Lucian reached out slowly and took her hand. His thumb brushed over the sleeve covering her moonmark. The moment he touched it, the mark warmed beneath the fabric, and his wolf answered with a low, steady rumble inside his chest. "I do not know what this is between us," he admitted, "but I know that when I am near you, my wolf stops fighting to stay alive. It simply rests." Selene felt something shift inside her. For 2 years, she had carried the belief that her chance at happiness had died with her husband. Yet, standing here, with the Alpha King holding her hand and looking at her like she was something precious instead of broken. She felt the first cracks in that belief. "I am still afraid," she whispered. "So am I," Lucian said. "But I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you." He lifted her hand and pressed a slow kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the only sound being the wind against the tower walls. Then Lucian spoke again, his voice quieter. "Tomorrow, I will address the court. I will make it clear that any challenge against me must go through me first. And I will make it clear that you are under my protection." Selene looked at him. "That will make you many enemies." "I already have enemies," he said. "At least now I will have something worth protecting." He released her hand but did not step away. "Rest, Selene. Whatever comes tomorrow, we will face it." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing," he said without turning around. "Your husband's name, was it Elias?" Selene's breath caught. "How did you know?" Lucian glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Because High Priestess Lirael asked for his death oath today," he said. "And I want to know why a dead man's vow still matters to her." He left before she could answer. Selene stood frozen in the center of the chamber, her heart pounding. Why would Lirael want her late husband's death oath? And why did the thought of it make the moon mark on her wrist burn like fire? Far below in the moon temple, High Priestess Lirael stood before the ancient altar. In her hands, she held a thin strip of blackened silver bound with faded wedding thread, the death oath of Selene's first mate. She placed it carefully into a silver bowl filled with dark liquid. "If the Widow Moon has chosen her again," Lirael whispered, "then we will use the vow she once made to bind her back to the dead." On the altar, the crowned widow carving pulsed with faint silver light. The Widow-Severing Rite had already begun. The Widow-Severing Rite struck at midnight. Selene woke with a scream trapped in her throat. The moon mark on her wrist burned as though someone had pressed a brand into her skin. She clutched her arm, gasping, as silver light bled between her fingers and spread across the stone floor in thin, vein-like lines. The pain was not just physical, it was memory, sharp, vivid, and merciless. She saw her husband Elias's face the night he died, the way he had smiled at her one last time before throwing himself between her and the enemy's blade. She felt the exact moment her wolf had torn itself away from her soul, leaving only silence behind. A violent pulse shook the tower. The silver lines on the floor connected into the shape of a crown, then shattered outward like broken glass. The door burst open. Lucian stormed in, shirtless, scales fully visible along his shoulders and chest. His eyes were wild with golden fire. "It's the rite," he growled. "Lirael is using your husband's death oath. She's trying to bind you back to the dead, so the Widow Moon cannot choose you again." Selene staggered to her feet, one hand still pressed to her burning wrist. The pain was so intense she could barely breathe, but she refused to fall. "Then let her try," she said through gritted teeth. "I will not let her drag me back into that grave." Lucian crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her as her knees buckled. He pulled her against his chest, one large hand splayed protectively over her back. The moment their bodies touched, his wolf answered with a deep, furious growl inside his chest. Golden fire poured from him into her, clashing against the silver pane of the rite. "Fight it," he whispered fiercely against her hair. "Do not let them take you from me." Selene clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. The pain was tearing her apart from the inside, but something else was rising beneath it. The Widow Moon gift, no longer quiet, no longer hidden. "I was never his," she gasped. "Not truly. I see that now." The silver light on the floor surged violently, trying to pull her down into memories of death and loss. But Selene refused. She lifted her head and looked straight into Lucian's eyes. "You are not allowed to die," she said, voice breaking. And I am not allowed to remain broken. Not anymore. Golden fire exploded between them. The silver lines on the floor hissed and burned away as Lucian's power merged with hers. The Rite screamed in protest, but it was no match for the living bond forming between the Alpha King and the woman his wolf had chosen. The pain in Selene's wrist suddenly eased. The moon mark flared once, bright, pure silver, before settling into a steady, warm glow. Lucian held her tighter, breathing hard. His forehead rested against hers. I felt it, he whispered. My wolf, it is no longer dying. It is fighting to live. Because of you. Selene's tears fell freely now. She had spent 2 years believing she was finished, that her life had ended the night her husband died. But standing here in Lucian's arms, with the Widow Moon gift no longer fighting to stay hidden, she felt something she had long thought impossible. She felt alive. I was so tired of being alone, she confessed, voice trembling. I thought the moon had abandoned me, but it was waiting. It was waiting for you. Lucian pulled back just enough to look at her. His golden eyes were raw with emotion. I have spent years running from weakness, he said. But you make me want to be weak if it means I can be with you. He cupped her face with both hands and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was desperate, hungry, and full of every unsaid word between them. Selene kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his hair as the golden and silver light swirled around them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Lucian rested his forehead against hers again. Tomorrow, he said, voice rough, I will stand before the court and declare you as mine, not as a consort, not as a healer, as the woman my wolf chose, as the woman I choose. Selene closed her eyes, letting his words sink into her wounded heart. I am still afraid, she whispered. So am I, he answered. But I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other as the last remnants of the Widow-Severing Rite burned away into nothing. But in the moon temple far below, High Priestess Lirael stood before the altar, watching the silver flame flicker and die. She slowly picked up the blackened death oath of Selene's first mate. The rite failed, she said softly to the empty chamber. But the bond with the dead still exists. She smiled, cold and sharp. Then we will use it to kill the living one. The night after the rite's failure, the old moon tower felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. Selene sat on the wide stone windowsill, wrapped in a thick fur cloak, watching the moonlight spill across the cliffs. The moon mark on her wrist no longer burned. It glowed with a soft, steady silver light, as though it had finally accepted its own awakening. The door opened quietly. Lucian entered without his usual guards. He carried 2 goblets of warmed spiced wine and set them on the small table before joining her at the window. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he simply stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body against the cold night air. You should be resting, he said after a long silence. I have rested my whole life, Selene replied softly. Tonight I want to feel something other than fear. Lucian turned to look at her. The golden fire in his eyes had grown stronger since the rite, but there was still exhaustion there, the kind that came from years of carrying a dying wolf and a heavy crown. I have never apologized properly, he said. Not for the way I looked at you during the mating ceremony, not for dismissing you as though you were nothing. I was cruel because I was afraid. Selene met his gaze. Afraid of what? Of feeling again. His voice was rough. After my first mate died, I locked everything away. I told myself a king could not afford grief or longing. When my wolf crawled to you, it forced me to feel everything I had buried. He reached out slowly and took her hand, turning it so the glowing moon mark faced upward. His thumb brushed gently over the silver lines. This mark, he said, it calls to my wolf in a way nothing else ever has. Not even my first mate's bond felt like this. Selene's breath caught. She looked down at their joined hands. My husband, Elias. He was a good man, she said quietly. He loved me in his own way, but our bond was never complete. After he died, I thought the emptiness inside me was grief. Now I wonder if it was the moon waiting for something or someone else. Lucian's grip tightened slightly, not in possession, but in quiet understanding. I will not rush you, he said. I have already taken too much from you. But I want you to know this. I choose you, Selene. Not because my wolf demands it. Not because the court needs a Luna. I choose you because when I am with you, I remember what it feels like to be a man instead of just a king. Tears welled in Selene's eyes. She had spent 2 years believing she would never be chosen again, that she was too broken, too empty, too cursed. Yet here was the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the kingdom, standing before her with his heart in his hands. I am still afraid, she whispered. Afraid that if I let myself care, the moon will take you away like it took everything else. Lucian pulled her gently into his arms. He held her carefully, as though she were something precious he had almost lost forever. One hand rested on her back, the other cradled the back of her head. Then be afraid with me, he murmured against her hair. I will not let the moon, the court, or any old rite take you from me. Not while I still breathe. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth as the moonlight poured through the window. The moon mark on Selene's wrist glowed brighter, and Lucian's wolf answered with a low, content rumble inside his chest. For the first time in years, Selene felt something warm and alive bloom inside her chest. Hope. Not the fragile kind she had clung to after her husband's death, but something deeper, something forged in fire and pain and quiet courage. Lucian pulled back just enough to look at her. He brushed a strand of hair from her face with surprising tenderness. You are not broken, he said softly. You are the only one strong enough to survive what the moon asked of you, and I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of standing beside you. Selene searched his eyes and found no deception, only raw honesty and a devotion that was slowly becoming impossible to doubt. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was slow and deep, filled with everything they had not yet said. Golden and silver light swirled gently around them, dancing like fireflies in the dark chamber. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. Lucian rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow will be difficult, he said. The court is still divided. Lirael is still dangerous. But no matter what happens, you are not alone. Selene nodded, her hand resting over his heart. Neither are you. They stayed together long into the night, talking quietly about the past, the future, and the strange path the moon had laid before them. But in the depths of the moon temple, High Priestess Lirael held the blackened death oath of Selene's first mate in her hands. The silver thread binding it glowed with unnatural light. She smiled coldly. The widow still carries the old vow, she whispered, and a vow once made to the dead can still bind the living. The ancient altar pulsed once in answer. The real battle had only just begun. The following morning, Lucian made his choice impossible to ignore. He summoned the full court to the moonlit hall at first light. No formal ceremony, no elaborate preparations, only a single, clear command. Every noble house, every council member, and High Priestess Lirael were to attend. Selene stood beside him on the raised platform, dressed in deep silver and black, the colors of the moon and the Alpha. She no longer wore mourning. The veil was gone. Her moon mark remained hidden beneath her sleeve, but its warm pulse was a constant reminder that she was no longer hiding. The hall was packed. Tension hung thick in the air like smoke. Lucian stepped forward, his voice carrying across the chamber with absolute authority. 2 nights ago, My wolf chose this woman, he declared, taking Selene's hand and raising it so the court could see. Not out of weakness, not out of desperation, but because she carries something the moon itself has awakened. The widow moon gift. Whispers erupted. Several nobles looked ready to protest. Lucian continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. I have spent years ruling through fear and calculated alliances. I have ignored the voice of my own wolf because I believed a king could not afford sentiment. I was wrong. He turned to Selene, speaking directly to her, in front of the entire court. Selene, daughter of a fallen house, widow of a man who gave his life protecting you. I publicly acknowledge you as the woman my wolf has chosen. I acknowledge the wrong I have done to you, and from this day forward, you stand not as a servant, not as a widow to be pitied, but as the woman I will protect with my life and my throne. A stunned silence fell over the hall. Then Lucian did something no one expected. He knelt before her. The Alpha King, the most feared ruler in the kingdom, knelt on one knee in front of the woman the court had mocked as broken. I choose you, he said, voice steady and clear. Not because the moon demands it, not because my wolf demands it, but because I have seen your strength, your quiet courage, and your heart that refused to break, even when the world tried to shatter it. I choose you, Selene. Will you stand with me? Tears shimmered in Selene's eyes, but she did not let them fall. She looked down at the man who had once dismissed her, now kneeling before her in front of everyone who had ever scorned her. She reached out and touched his shoulder. I will stand with you, she said, her voice carrying through the hall. Not as a prize, not as a healer, but as your equal, as the woman who will fight beside you, not behind you. Lucian rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead in full view of the court. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was unmistakable. The Alpha King had chosen. High Priestess Liriel stood at the edge of the council, her face a mask of controlled fury. Her fingers tightened around the hidden death oath in her sleeve. But she said nothing. After the court was dismissed, Lucian led Selene to a private balcony overlooking the cliffs. The wind was cold, but he wrapped his cloak around her shoulders and held her close. You did not have to do that, Selene said softly. I did, Lucian replied. For too long I have hidden behind the mask of the ruthless king. Today I showed them the man I want to become for you, for our future. Selene leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. She could hear the steady, stronger rhythm of his heartbeat. His wolf was no longer dying. It was fighting to live. I am still learning how to trust this, she admitted. But every time you choose me in front of them, it becomes easier. Lucian tilted her chin up gently and kissed her. Slow, deep, and full of promise. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I have one more thing to tell you, he said quietly. I have begun the process of dissolving what remains of your blood oath. The moon mark on your wrist will no longer be a curse. It will be a crown. Selene's breath caught. You would do that for me? I would burn the old laws themselves if they tried to keep you from me. They stood together in silence, watching the sun rise over the kingdom. For the first time in years, Selene felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. But as they returned to the moon tower, a messenger arrived, pale and breathless. Your Majesty, High Priestess Liriel has taken the death oath of Selene's first mate into the deepest chamber of the Moon Temple. She has sealed the doors. She says the Widow-Severing Rite is not yet finished. Lucian's expression darkened. Selene felt the moon mark on her wrist burn once more, not with pain this time, but with warning. The High Priestess had not surrendered. She was preparing to bind Selene back to the dead man she had once called husband, and she would use that bond to destroy the living one. Lucian pulled Selene closer, his arm wrapping protectively around her. We end this tonight, he said, voice like steel. Together. Selene nodded, her hand resting over the glowing mark on her wrist. The moon had chosen her. Now she would choose her own fate. The moon temple doors were sealed with ancient silver runes, but they shattered like glass the moment Lucian's fist struck them. He stormed into the deepest chamber with Selene at his side, golden fire blazing along his arms and shoulders. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and old blood. At the center of the circular altar, High Priestess Lirael stood bathed in sickly silver light. In her hands, she held the blackened death oath of Selene's first mate, the faded wedding thread now pulsing with dark power. "You are too late," Lirael said, her voice echoing unnaturally through the chamber. "The Widow-Severing Rite is already bound. The dead man's vow will drag her back into the grave she should never have left." Selene felt the moon mark on her wrist ignite with searing pain. Memories flooded her, not just of her husband's death, but of every moment she had blamed herself for surviving. The silver light tried to pull her down, to bind her soul once more to the past. Lucian roared and unleashed a torrent of golden dragon fire toward the altar. The flames collided with Lirael's barrier in a violent explosion that cracked the stone walls. "Release her," he bellowed, "or I will burn this temple and everything in it to ash." Lirael laughed, cold and sharp. "You cannot kill what is already dead, my king. This woman belongs to the past. The Widow Moon is a curse, not a gift. It destroys every alpha it touches." She raised the death oath high. The blackened silver thread unraveled and shot towards Selene like living chains. Selene cried out as the thread wrapped around her wrist, cutting into her skin. The pain was unbearable. It was not just physical. It was every moment of grief, every night she had spent believing she was unworthy of love, every time the court had called her broken. Lucian lunged forward, but an invisible force threw him back against the wall. His wolf howled inside him, desperate to reach her. "Selene!" he roared, fighting against the barrier with everything he had. Golden fire poured from him, but the rite was too strong. Selene fell to her knees, the silver thread tightening like a noose around her soul. Tears streamed down her face as the memories tried to drown her. "I was never his," she gasped through the pain. "I was always meant for more." The moon mark on her wrist flared violently. Silver and golden light collided within her, fighting for dominance. The Widow Moon gift, born from true heartbreak and survival, finally awakened in full. A brilliant silver crown of light formed above her head. The death oath thread began to burn away, thread by thread. Lirael's eyes widened in horror. No, this cannot be. The gift was supposed to die with the last widow. Selene rose slowly to her feet. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She looked at Lirael with quiet, burning strength. "You used fear and old vows to control us," she said, voice steady despite the tears. "You took my wolf. You took my husband. You tried to take my future. But I am still here." She raised her hand. The moon mark glowed like a living crown. Silver light erupted from her palm and slammed into Lirael, shattering the priestess's barrier. Lucian broke free and rushed to Selene's side. He pulled her against him, one arm wrapped protectively around her as his golden fire merged with her silver light. Together, they pushed forward. The death oath of her first mate burned completely in Lirael's hands, turning to ash. Lirael screamed as the full force of the awakened Widow Moon gift struck her. She was thrown backward against the altar, blood trickling from her mouth. "You cannot win," she gasped. The old ways end tonight," Lucian growled. He stepped forward, Selene beside him. "You have poisoned this kingdom with fear long enough. Your temple will be sealed. Your power is broken." Lirael looked at Selene one final time, hatred and exhaustion warring in her eyes. "You will never be free," she whispered. "The dead always come back for what they lost." Then she collapsed, unconscious but alive. The chamber fell silent. Selene stood trembling in Lucian's arms. The moon mark on her wrist no longer burned. It glowed with a soft, steady silver light, a crown of survival, not suffering. Lucian turned to her and dropped to his knees once more, this time not for the court, but for her alone. "I almost lost you," he said, voice raw. "I will never let that happen again." Selene knelt with him, cupping his face in her hands. "You did not lose me," she whispered. "You found me, and I found you." They kissed in the ruins of the Moon Temple, desperate, fierce, and full of every emotion they had fought so hard to reach. Golden and silver light swirled around them, merging into something new and powerful. The Widow Moon had not come to destroy. It had come to heal. But as they held each other in the aftermath, neither noticed the single blackened thread from the death oath that had survived the fire, now glowing faintly on the floor, waiting. The Moon Temple fell silent in the aftermath of the battle. Silver and golden light still lingered in the air, like dying embers, as Lucian helped Selene to her feet. The High Priestess Lirael lay unconscious on the cold stone floor, her silver robes torn and stained with blood. The ancient altar was cracked, and the death oath of Selene's first mate had burned to nothing but a small pile of ash. Selene leaned heavily against Lucian, her body trembling from the immense power she had just unleashed. The moon mark on her wrist no longer burned with pain. It glowed with a soft, steady silver light, a crown of survival, not suffering. Lucian held her close, one arm wrapped protectively around her waist, his other hand gently brushing the hair from her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice rough with worry. Selene shook her head. "Not in body, but my heart. It feels like it has been torn open and put back together again." Lucian pressed his forehead to hers. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "You faced the woman who tried to bind you to the dead, and you refused to break. I have never seen anything like it." They stood together for a long moment, breathing in the quiet after the storm. The golden fire in Lucian's chest burned stronger than it had in years. His wolf no longer felt like it was dying. It felt alive, steady, and fiercely protective of the woman in his arms. Outside the temple, the Blood Council and the court waited in tense silence. When Lucian and Selene emerged together, the entire hall fell quiet. Lucian did not release Selene's hand as he addressed them. "High Priestess Lirael has been stripped of her title and will be held for judgment," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "She used forbidden rites to attack the woman the moon itself has chosen. Let this be the end of fear ruling this kingdom." He turned to Selene, speaking loud enough for every noble to hear. "Selene, the Widow Moon has awakened in you. You are no longer the wolfless widow the court once mocked. You are the woman who saved my wolf, who stood against the old ways, and who has earned my respect and my heart." He knelt before her once more, not in submission, but in deep, public devotion. "I ask you, before this court and before the moon that watches over us, to stand with me, not as my Luna out of duty, but as my chosen mate, as my equal, as the woman I love." The hall was completely silent. Selene looked down at the Alpha King kneeling before her. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her voice was steady and clear when she answered. "I have spent 2 years believing I was broken," she said, "that the moon had abandoned me. But you saw me when no one else would. You chose me when it cost you the favor of the court. I will stand with you, Lucian, not as a prize, but as your partner, as the woman who chooses you in return." Lucian rose and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her deeply in front of the entire court, a kiss filled with hard-earned love, respect, and promise. Golden and silver light swirled around them, bathing the hall in a soft, hopeful glow. When they parted, Lucian kept her close, his arm around her waist. "The court will accept this union," he said firmly. "Anyone who challenges it challenges me directly." No one stepped forward. Later that evening, in the quiet of Lucian rested his chin on top of her head. I still have much to atone for, he said quietly. I hurt you. I dismissed you. I nearly lost you because of my pride. Selene turned in his arms and looked up at him. You are atoning, she replied. Every time you choose me in front of them, every time you hold me when the past tries to pull me back, that is enough for now. Lucian kissed her forehead, then her lips, slow and tender. I love you, he said, the words still new but deeply felt. Not because the moon demands it, not because my wolf chose you, but because you are the strongest, most courageous woman I have ever known. Selene smiled through happy tears. And I love you, she whispered, the man behind the crown, the one who learned how to kneel. They held each other as the moon rose high above Dragonspire, bathing the kingdom in silver light. The court was still divided. Some nobles would never fully accept her. The shadows of the past still lingered, but for the first time in years, Selene felt truly seen, truly chosen, truly home. And in the deepest chamber of the sealed moon temple, one small fragment of blackened silver, the last remnant of the death oath, pulsed with a faint, stubborn red glow. The past had not yet finished speaking, but the future had already begun. Spring came gently to the kingdom of the moonlit hall. The snow that had blanketed Dragonspire for months finally melted, revealing green fields and blooming moonflowers along the cliffs. The kingdom was still healing, but for the first time in many years it breathed with cautious hope. Selene stood on the wide royal balcony, overlooking the valley, the wind gently lifting her silver-trimmed gown. The moon mark on her wrist had settled into a soft, permanent glow, no longer a curse, but a crown she had earned through pain and survival. She rested one hand over her stomach, where a new life was beginning to grow, a child born of choice, not obligation. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind. Lucian pulled her back against his chest, his chin resting on top of her head. His wolf was no longer dying. The golden fire in his blood burned steady and strong, stabilized by the woman who had refused to let him fade. You are quiet this morning, he murmured. Selene smiled, leaning into his warmth. I was thinking about how far we have come. 2 years ago, I stood in that hall as the wolfless widow everyone pitied. Today, I stand here as your chosen mate, carrying our child. Lucian turned her gently in his arms so he could look at her. His golden eyes were soft with a devotion he no longer tried to hide. You were never broken, he said. You were waiting, and I was blind. I spent years ruling with fear because I thought love made kings weak. You showed me that the strongest kings are those who choose to love anyway. He dropped to one knee before her, just as he had done before the court, but this time it was only for the two of them. I vow to you, Selene, he said, voice deep and sincere, that I will never again put the throne before you. I will protect you, our child, and this kingdom with everything I am, not as a king, but as the man who loves you. Selene's eyes shimmered with happy tears. She touched his face, tracing the faint scales along his jaw. And I vow to stand beside you, she whispered, not as a widow, not as a survivor, but as your equal, as the woman who chooses you every day. Lucian rose and kissed her deeply, pouring every unsaid word, every regret, and every promise into that kiss. Golden and silver light swirled around them, dancing in the morning sun like living stars. Later that afternoon, the court gathered once more, not for judgment, but for celebration. Selene walked down the aisle, not as a rejected widow, but as the chosen consort of the Alpha King. Lucian waited for her at the altar, his eyes never leaving her. When she reached him, he took both her hands in his. Before the entire kingdom, he spoke his final vow. I choose you, Selene, in this life and the next, as my mate, as my queen, as the mother of my children and the light that saved my wolf. Selene's voice was steady and warm as she replied, "And I choose you, Lucian, the man who learned to kneel, the king who learned to love. I will walk beside you through every storm and every dawn." They sealed their bond with a kiss as golden and silver light filled the hall. The court, once divided, now watched with a mixture of awe and acceptance. Some still whispered, but none dared challenge what the moon and the Alpha King had chosen. In the quiet months that followed, Dragonspire began to truly heal. The old moon temple was sealed, its forbidden rites buried with the past. Lirael remained imprisoned, a reminder that even the most powerful could fall when they chose fear over understanding. Selene and Lucian built something new together, not a perfect kingdom, but a stronger one. They spent quiet evenings on the balcony, talking about the future. Lucian learned to rule with compassion as well as strength. Selene learned to trust again, her widow moon gift now used to heal rather than hide. One clear spring night, as they stood together watching the moon rise, Lucian rested his hand over her gently rounded belly. "Our child will never know what it means to be unwanted," he said softly. "They will know they were chosen from the very beginning." Selene smiled and leaned against him. "And they will know that even when the world calls you broken," she whispered, "sometimes the moon is simply waiting for you to become something greater." The wind carried their words across the cliffs as golden and silver light danced together in the sky. The past had been answered, a new future had begun, and in the heart of the kingdom, a strong, steady flame burned bright, one that would never be allowed to die again.